All right. So welcome to Taos Housing Partnership Speaker Series. Tonight, I think this is our fourth one. We're halfway through. It's kind of like the seventh inning stretch, if anybody watches baseball. My name is Lisa O'Brien. I always ask this question because it always gets me excited. How many people in this room are here for the very first time for a speaker series? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, like I have to tell you, it's so wonderful when Alexandra and I debrief the next day and we go, God, we had 30 people there. And usually it's about 20-25% of our audience is here for the very first time. So the fact that I can say that 4 times in a row makes me very happy because it's just giving me the, yes, keep doing. A couple folks I want to just thank really quickly before I hand it off to Alexandra to do introductions of our 2 amazing speakers. Taos County, this is sponsored in partnership with Taos County, and Commissioner Brush is here. And Andy Jones is here, and Rachel is here, Rachel Romero, who is the planning director. Just can't say enough about the partnership that Taos Housing Partnership has with the county, and that the county is sponsoring this speaker series. So thank you for giving us the space. Thank you for continuing to have great technology for us. And I want to acknowledge again True Kids 1, so Pete and Amber in the back, who always just get us going and make everybody on camera look beautiful. The other person I want to introduce is Jenny Parks, who is the senior, I'm going to mess it up, vice president. Please, what is your big title? Vice President of Strategic Philanthropy with Ancorum Health Foundation. For those of you who were here last time, I introduced Lo Marcoline, who is working with Taos Housing Partnership as a senior fellow. And Jenny is here from Ancorum Health Foundation, came up from Santa Fe, and is here for our speaker series tonight. So just want to say thank you for being an amazing partner. Ancorum was one of those both funding and thought partners when Taos Housing Partnership was developing. So it's so beautiful to have that continuation from conversations that started probably 4 years ago. So I will hand the microphone off to Alexandra, who everybody loves. Remember we all agreed on that last time? I heard it from so many people, and I love hearing that. So Alexandra Goldman is our community engagement manager, and she has been scheduling all of these things. So this is really the backbone of this particular activity.
Thanks, Lisa. Very embarrassing. Good evening, everyone. I will try to keep it brief. Today, we are going to be talking about affordable housing trust funds. We have 2 speakers. We're so lucky to have them here. They are 2 of the people who I feel are some of the most important people in affordable housing in northern New Mexico. So really lucky to have them here, or maybe in the whole state, probably. So we're super lucky to have them here today. We have Alexandra Ladd. I'm not used to having another Alexandra, but that is fantastic. She's currently the director of Santa Fe County Land Use. She previously was the director of affordable housing in the city of Santa Fe, where she played a huge role in getting their trust fund really off the ground and making a huge impact. So we're going to hear about her work there. We also have Jenn Lopez, who is the president of Project Moxie. Project Moxie has been working in Taos County since 2020 and working in New Mexico and Colorado since before that. Jenn has a history of working here in New Mexico. They were actually colleagues in the city of Santa Fe, I learned recently. And Jenn just has a really broad knowledge about trust funds throughout the state, about other sources of affordable housing funding. We're really lucky to have her here to share her knowledge. So with that, I will pass it to Alexandra. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexandra. I too feel very awkward with another Alexandra in the room. I'm not used to that. I really appreciate that's a wonderful welcome. So nice to be here. So nice to see all the folks in the room. This is hard work, and it's really exciting to know that a lot of people care deeply about the issues facing all of our communities, honestly, nationwide, but it is especially acute here in New Mexico, in Santa Fe and Taos and parts of Albuquerque and parts of Las Cruces, and we're kind of seeing it everywhere. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time talking because Jenn is going to say lots of amazing things, but Jenn and I also, we went to planning school together at UNM, so we go back even further than the city of Santa Fe. We're going to have a lot of fun answering your questions and riffing off of each other because we've been doing this for a long time. So one statement I feel like I should make. So I'm currently employed by the County of Santa Fe. I'm the director for their land use department. I worked for the city 2 different times. First, right out of grad school as an affordable housing planner. That's where Jenn and I worked together under Joseph Montoya's leadership, and he's sort of infamous in the state of New Mexico. And then I was a consultant and wrote strategic housing plans. We're going to talk about the housing plans in a minute. For several communities in New Mexico as part of a consulting team. And then I went back to the city in 2012 and started the job at the county a year ago. So I'm still super green at my current job and still sort of speaking authoritatively about my former job. So I just want to make sure nobody thinks I'm representing the city here tonight. I'm just representing my experience, and it happened to be at the city. But I will slip up and I will say, like, I'll talk about it as if I still work there and still do this work for the city. So please forgive me and don't quote me as representing the city, whatever you do. Okay, so with that said, I wonder the easiest way to do this. Oh dear, I have too many. Okay, I'll click our arrow. So, and many of you are probably familiar, the state of New Mexico has an anti-donation clause, and I'm about to make a pitch for changing some legislation, which prohibits the use of public resources for the benefit of private individuals or companies or entities, unless the use of the funds meets one of the exemptions in the law. And the exemptions are: you can take care of indigent people, homeless folks, people who have no other resources. There's an exemption for economic development, so you can use public funds to support economic activity in your community, and affordable housing. This is the newest exemption. It was passed in 2007. One of the well, there are many requirements, believe you me. It's not an easy way to use money, but the community that wants to use, or a public entity that wants to use resources to support affordable housing, has to have 2 things. It has to have a strategic housing plan in place, which identifies housing needs and creates a framework of goals and strategies and ways to address that need that's been identified using data, but also using some qualitative resources and knowledge of the community. And the second thing is a community has to have an ordinance that talks about how the funds are going to be used and what the restrictions are. The ordinance in Santa Fe is 26-3 in the Santa Fe City Code. It's really similar to the Las Vegas ordinance and many others around the state, because Housing New Mexico, that's what they're called now, right? I'm going to slip up and call them MFA for sure. But anyway, the Housing New Mexico is given the oversight role by the state legislature to manage this exemption and make sure that it wasn't creating some nefarious activities. And so on their website, they have a sample ordinance. And so everybody's ordinance kind of reads the same, more or less. If I were to change the Santa Fe ordinance, I would be a little bit more specific about talking about a trust fund as more than just money sitting in a budget line item. It can be the donation of resources, it can be the donation of a building, it can be a donation of land, it can be other things as well. And I don't think the city's ordinance talks about it. I would add a section just as a little reflection to really talk about other creative ways to create value. And so you have to report to the Housing New Mexico if you work for an agency or an entity that's donating. So in Santa Fe, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund was set up as the repository of fees and revenues that were generated in very specific ways. So we have affordability liens. We'll talk more about that. Oh, wait, I forgot my pitch. Back up a slide. Is other Western states, most Western states had the anti-donation clause because so much land was given away to all the railroad companies back in the 1800s, because everybody wanted the railroad to go through their town, and so these companies benefited hugely from these donations. And a lot of the Western states said, oof, we need to be a little bit more careful about how we're using public resources. Most other Western states have repealed their anti-donation clauses because they realize, like in modern day times, we have actual communication between towns and we can kind of keep track of how public resources are being used. There are a lot of tools that we didn't have back in the 1800s. New Mexico hasn't, and there was an effort this year at the legislature to introduce that legislation, so I'm just putting that on everyone's radar. That might be something to think about moving forward. Because it doesn't make it easy. It's a little clunky here. Anyway, so we did some things, and when I came back to the city in 2012, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund was set up, and it had written into the ordinance where the revenues came from. So it was, and you can read it right here. I won't read the slide necessarily, but it was, development fees that developers would pay if certain tracts of city land were sold. And then program income, so when assisted home buyer paid off a lien, that would go in there. But it was all over the place, right? Like some years we had $400,000 in there, which seemed like a lot of money. Other years we collected almost nothing because it really relied on real estate development and various economic cycles that we had absolutely no control over. So here's the language right from the act. I'll just get up. The other thing that I was really clear about was that the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, because under the state statute, it could serve higher incomes than something like the CDBG program, which is capped at 80% of area median income. So I felt like it was really important to have those two funding sources available at the same time. So a nonprofit developer or somebody assisting with affordable housing needs could serve both ranges of people, because as soon as you just had CDBG out there, then somebody came in like, oh my gosh, there's 10 people who earn 82% of the area median income and I can't help them. So we really tried to encourage our providers and our partners in the community to, if it was part of their mission, to serve both a bigger range. Obviously some are serving just very low income, but anyway, we were just encouraging them, like, everybody has housing needs. And so the trust fund really gave us a way to kind of expand the capacity of our community to serve the needs. This is another important point. We'll come back to it. Any applicant for Affordable Housing Trust Fund had to bring $3 of their own money. And that was our rule. We made that rule up at the city. It's not required. Here are some other rules we had. Must be located within the city limits. It seems kind of obvious, but then we started sort of playing around in this idea of, what about somebody who lives just like right outside the city limits, but they work for a city employer and they're spending all their money in the city? Maybe we want to help them buy a house in that spot. And so we played around with that a little bit, and we had an exemption for people who were employed with a Santa Fe city of Santa Fe based employer. The income level currently is 120% of AMI, but the state has raised theirs, and if I hadn't left the city, I would have raised the cities, because honestly, even at 120% of AMI, people in Santa Fe cannot afford a median price home. They can't even afford a price restricted home. So we were talking about raising that. And I think the other key point that people probably don't really realize, you can be a for-profit business. You don't have to be a nonprofit business to receive affordable housing trust funds. You just have to have a mission to provide housing to people with low or moderate or very low incomes. And so a lot of the tax credit developers are not nonprofit. And so this is important because, there's sort of like a halo around the nonprofits and, they should get everything. But, they don't always have the capacity to build the housing or deliver the services. And so if you're trying to get housing in your community, everyone's your partner. And so that was something that we were very clear about. Another really key point, and this is part of the state law, you cannot pay for services, administrative costs, capacity building. None of that's eligible. There's one little nuance, and I'll get to that in the next slide. But the idea is that this isn't about supporting organizational work. It's about supporting the construction, the provision, the rehab of housing. Here are some of the main activities that the City of Santa Fe's trust fund historically has funded. I made up these percentages just based on my fuzzy memory because I know they're exactly wrong, but generally right. Because I didn't have access to my old files when I was putting this together. So anyway, but I just want to make a couple of points. Down payment assistance using trust funds is really easy, especially if you have the nonprofit partner who can help with all of the underwriting for your home buyer, can help like them clear up their credit, put savings, all the stuff that a bank doesn't do. So these folks, when they're ready for home ownership, they're great candidates for home ownership. And if you allow your partner to hold that lien, that makes it easier for you as a governmental entity. So they've got the relationship with the home buyer. And if that home buyer gets into trouble and they suddenly can't pay they're going to go back to the nonprofit. They're not going to come to a governmental agency and say, oh, I'm in trouble. And the governmental agency, being clunky and bureaucratic, couldn't help them anyway. So this is just a point, and we'll probably talk more about this later, but something to think about. Rental assistance. So this was not traditionally part of the package for Affordable Housing Trust Fund. When I came back to the city at all, it was all really, really focused on home ownership. And in fact, one of the rules that the city wrote into its ordinance, this was not a state rule, was 51% of the funds had to be used for home ownership activities or construction of home ownership housing. And after a while, I thought, why? Don't we want to be funding the needs that are presented to us at the time they're presented? And why would we be so dictatorial about it? And homeownership housing is great, but lots of people need affordable rental housing and support with rent. One of our amazing nonprofits, the LifeLink, they were a partner with the city as a sub-grantee of some HUD funds through a program called Shelter Plus Care that turned into Continuum of Care, where they were working with really very, very low income folks, people's transitioning off the streets, struggling with lots and lots of different challenges, very focused on their models, very focused on mental health. But HUD had rules like, if you stayed in a motel for one night, you're no longer homeless, and therefore you are not qualified to get these funds. And so the nonprofit came to me and they're like, look, we could do so much if we didn't have the HUD restrictions. What do you think if we pilot a rental assistance program for the city? And I said, absolutely. So we created a program that didn't have all of those annoying, ridiculous rules that would always crop up with that like one household who just for one little thing couldn't get help. They ran it similarly to the HUD program. This wasn't just like throwing money around. This was people had to be income qualified. They had to be also supported if they needed it or wanted it with other services. The nonprofit would work with the landlords. Everything had to be documented. The costs had to be legitimate, all that stuff. And we broadened it. We said, it's not just rent that's hard to pay. People get into arrears, and maybe it's utility arrears or it's rental arrears, or if they can just get into the apartment, they can pay the rent, but like the first month, last month, all the stuff, signing up with all the deposits for the utility, like that's the barrier for them. So we were very flexible. We basically worked with the nonprofit to design a program, meeting people where they're at. Like we're not gonna say there's any use that's not okay. I mean, there are uses that aren't okay, but in terms of like what is the barrier for that household to get into the unit or to stay in the unit. And that nonprofit ended up training 3 or 4 more nonprofits on how to do rental assistance, because then what happened after a couple of years, they were knocking it out of the park and it was great. Some of the other nonprofits who were not housing nonprofits at all, they were providing services for people like the YouthWorks program. So they're working with either kids who are unattached to families or who have dropped out of school or who've gotten into trouble. They're working with kids to kind of get them back on a career path, back on a school path. And what they were realizing is it doesn't matter how good our programs are if our families, the kids and the families that they have aren't housed securely and safely, they can't succeed in our programs. So they started thinking about like, how can we support the housing side to this? And they started running a rental assistance program that was funded by the city, and it was great because it was, they're meeting these folks like, we're going to take care of all the needs you have or connect you to the services you need. So that was pretty exciting. Okay, so here's the one like weird little nuance. I said no services. I said no admin costs. If the facility is serving homeless, the funds can be used for the cost of utilities for the facility. It can be used for the cost of the services needed to operate the facility. So you have an intake person at the shelter, you can pay for that person's salary because without that person, the units, the beds cannot be provided. But you cannot pay for the person doing all the accounting in the back office. That's an organizational expense. That is not eligible for funds. So I just want to make that distinction. The city of Santa Fe, I almost said we. The city of Santa Fe, when the pandemic hit, took an old dorm of the College of Santa Fe and turned it into a non-congregate shelter. And we worked with the Coalition on Homelessness to stand up a nonprofit, and we just got as much money going in that direction as we could. And at that point in time, we had such a good track record with the housing trust funds that our nonprofit partners lobbied the city council and said, look, this is really hard to know what projects can be funded when the revenues go up and down. We need you guys to make a political commitment to give us put some real money into that trust fund. And that was when, then COVID hit and everyone was panicking. The council put $3 million into the fund, out of the general fund, put it into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and it was game changing. It was amazing. But that's kind of what it took. A pandemic, maybe not. But I will say this, we were demonstrating amazing success too. And it was because we were hitting all the spectrums of housing need. We had emergency housing for people. We had assisted rental. We had rental rehab so that properties could stay affordable. We had homeownership rehab. We had home buyer assistance, and we had construction. So we had a lot of stuff going on, and I think that's another key. The other point I will make is you don't want to give your trust fund money away to someone who can't use it. Either because they don't have the capacity, they don't have like just the basics of organizational functionality, all of these things. So in our application, we would have all of this had to be spelled out. They had to demonstrate all of the capacity to provide the housing or deliver the programming or build the housing. And then the city had a role too, which is to create this application process, create the funding process in a way that was both transparent, but also easy for the applicant to navigate. And the biggest mistake I've seen in government solicitations, it's like the flip side of the same coin, too specific and way too general. And so what we did with the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, instead of saying, we want you to do this and this and this and this, and if you want to do that, apply for this money, we would say, hey, what is the housing need that you see in the community? Demonstrate it. Show us the data. Okay, you've proven that people really need help buying a home in this economy by giving us all the stats and the data. So here, now tell us how your organization is set up to deliver this. And you're going to show us your leverage. And so that way we could provide funding for the programs that needed it and could use it in that moment, as opposed to, well, we think it would be really great to build some rental housing that blah, 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 and nobody wants to build rental housing or is able to build rental housing that year. So you've just kind of wasted the whole process. So it was almost like a little crowdsourcing, like, okay, providers in the community, you tell us who you're trying to help and how you're trying to do it, and show us you have the capacity, and we're going to fund your program or your project. And then all of this stuff, I think monitoring is really important. There's also this sense of like, oh, well, you fund the great program and you sit back and everything wonderful, rainbows and unicorns, everything great happens. Nope, you got to be on top of it. Those grantees of those funds, they need to be reporting how they're using them. It's all part of a system. I had a great staff at the city who could, they'd send out their little reminders. We need your monthly report, and we tried to make it easy, but we also, we asked the hard questions like, why aren't you spending the money? Or what do we need to change to make this work better? And it was a great partnership. And I'm not sure that it's flourishing right now without me there. And then, of course, you want to tell the elected officials what's going on. And you want them to own it, and you want them to feel good about it, and you want them to be supportive. So I spent a lot of time talking to them about it. So lessons learned, best practice, whatever you want to call this. Again, my first point, you're not funding dreams. This is about a project that needs extra to get over the hump, needs funding to go from almost there to absolutely there to pretty good to awesome. So that's a big point. You want to fund real stuff. And again, the city, we would have, for every dollar applied for, they had to show $3 were coming from another source or coming from their organizational resources. We also let them use in-kind resources. So if they had a partnership with another entity that was providing counseling services to their residents, that counted as that leverage. I think just in general, down payment assistance, the actual ratio is closer to $17 for every $1 of Affordable Housing Trust Fund. This is a rendition of Seiler Yard in Santa Fe, which used Affordable Housing Trust Fund. I think that ratio was about $10 for every $1 of Affordable Housing Trust Funds. Places like the LifeLink that were working with very low income folks without any income themselves to bring to the table, their ratios were closer to the 1 to 3, but we had this whole calculation for helping them figure it out. And eventually, as people get stabilized, they start to pay a little bit more in rent. And so we were pretty creative about that. I would say, again, prioritize where the capacity is and the project feasibility. There might be something that just is such an amazing concept. Don't fall for it. It's a shiny thing. It needs to be baked before you're going to put your trust fund money into it. Look for the projects that are ready to go and the developers or the providers who can do it. And again, we were, to the point I just made, you can't be top down unless sometimes there's a very specific project that you want to, or type of project that you want to fund, or there's political will to fund. But I really liked this approach to just say, tell us what you see, tell us what the need is, demonstrate that, show us how you have the capacity to meet the need. And that way you didn't have to and I'll just throw my current employer under the bus just a little tiny bit. The county had recently, before I started there, had funded a trust fund and wanted to put money out in the community to support development of affordable rental. And they asked me, I just started, they said, can you be on our funding committee? And I was like, sure, yeah, this is what I do. I can do this. And I started looking at the responses, and I was like, that's interesting. And I look at the RFP and the way they had written it, and it did exactly that. It was like, well, we want each unit to have this and that and that, and like stuff like, no, don't specify there. And then it was like a little too general for like, well, what do you want the outcome to be? Like, what problem are you trying to solve? Like, because you're not being very clear about how a project's going to come to you and be like, that's the one. And luckily, they knew they had projects that were well underway, so all of the capacity and the leverage part was taken care of, and it all worked out. But it was interesting because I was reading it like, oh, yeah, they're lucky. They got lucky because they got good applicants, but they might not have. And then this is the other point I would make. I had a advisory board at the city that was called the Community Development Commission, and it was really, really helpful because that group, there was one city councilor representing sort of the political viewpoint, and it was we didn't always have lived experience folks, but we tried. But it was really community folks. It was the people either doing the housing or advocating for the housing or had experience in planning, land use, construction, design, and it was great because I would run stuff by them and they'd be like, wait a minute, you get in your own head and you've done it a lot and you think everyone is thinking like you are, understands all of the acronyms that come flying out of your mouth. And I'd have my advisory committee like, whoa, what does that mean? And I'd realize, oh yeah, normal people don't understand housing lingo. So it was always sort of a good check there. But then they also would create a process so that by the time it got to the governing body level, knowing that the Community Development Commission had already vetted the applications and made funding recommendations, the city council was like, they'd ask questions. They might like one project more than another, but done. If that community-based group is telling us that these are the good projects and they've spent all this time evaluating them, that's super helpful. So it's nice because it takes the burden off of staff who, you can get into a little conflict because of your relationships with the community providers. But it also wasn't going to the governing body for those. They had to approve it ultimately, but they weren't going through the recommendation or the evaluation process, which, obviously that's easier for them, but it just helps because it just takes it out of the politics just a little bit. So I would recommend an advisory committee to help with the funding decision. And that's it. And I'll turn it over to Miss Jenn.
Yay. Ooh, that was awesome. So what do we do about all these great ideas for Taos, right? And so a lot of you have maybe seen me speak before, and I'm a quick speaker, and so I'm really going to focus on what maybe are messages you haven't heard me say before. So, and I really do want to focus on how would you start to think about operationalizing a trust fund. Commissioner Brush, we had this conversation in 21 or 22 at the Taos Community Foundation. And I think I said to you at that point, I love your idea, but we have to set up infrastructure for an organization first, and you've been so patient, right? So we're getting closer and closer. I'm going to jump right in. I am not going to do the Affordable Housing Act again, but I'm going to highlight Andy Jones for his great work putting it together for Taos County, it's a relatively, yay, Andy. It's with his boss helping as well. I'm sure Rachel's helpful, and Brent and everyone else. But what's important is you got an ordinance in 2022. So again, this is fairly new for Taos County. I think Town of Taos did theirs in recently as well. So these are enabling pieces of policy that had to be put in place, and they take a bit, right, to get those things done. And again, I love it. So Andy, I know you did a ton of research. You asked me to look at it and I didn't, and because I was busy, I'm so sorry, but you did a great job. So you did keep it open, as Alexandra suggested. Any sort of resource that the county might have could go to housing, right? It's wonderful. And then, again, we just did a presentation to the commissioners a few months ago, just to kind of onboard all these concepts around providing resources. And again, this ordinance for Taos County can give funds to a variety of different organizations. So again, best practice, very broad, a lot of opportunity here. And again, we're setting at area median income at 120 and 80 for rental. And in 2020, Monica Beta, who's infamous, she's a brilliant woman. We all went to school with her too. She wrote a really great affordable housing plan in 2020 that it launched the ordinance. We came up and did some updates, but all of that hard work, set the stage for action. I just want to say, well, what about money in New Mexico, and how do you actually fund projects in New Mexico? Like, why do you keep talking about local trust funds, right? I'm going to just show a couple of slides because I think hopefully they'll make the point. But there's really not a lot of dedicated, ongoing, predictable funding at the state level for affordable housing. Why? Well, there's a lot of reasons for that, but it's just there hasn't been enough of political pressure, advocacy, and coalition building to establish some very, how do I say this, just regular funds that are statutorily there, right? So you have a housing trust fund and it's got more money, but the point is there's just not a lot. We've got some infrastructure to build at the state. That is not a criticism at all, it's just a fact. So we rely heavily on the federal government, which is kind of scary right now, right? So a lot of these programs started with federal funds, and then we were able to diversify with local. So right now, if you want to build a rental project in New Mexico, your best bet is using the low-income housing tax credit program, which is not perfect. It has a lot of issues. It's very expensive, and it has limitations on who you can serve. But it will pay for the project, the primary cost of the project. So that's why a lot of communities go after that. And then we see great examples of how to do for-sale housing, which is really locally driven by land and infrastructure that's provided locally, and then usually it's a mix of incomes. So I know that's not very exciting, but that's the facts. Like, we have these two models, and anything outside of these models take a lot longer or don't happen, right? So, well, what's the gap if you use these programs? Well, the gaps are quite large. So Lisa and I joke all the time because I think Lisa gets asked about every 2 months, why haven't you built anything yet, or why isn't there a project? This is why. This is the definitive right here, okay? If you do a tax credit project tomorrow in Taos, and we've modeled this with real numbers from a project we just did, you still have $95,000 to $100,000 gap per unit. Who's gonna write the check? County can't do it. Town can't do it, I don't think. How we would do this if we did this project tomorrow is most projects in New Mexico go to the state through their legislature and they get a capital outlay request. There's no predictability to this. It's the wild, wild west, okay? So it's really risky to do these projects in New Mexico. If you do for sale, if you're not mixing incomes, you're straight up just trying to do like a $300,000 home, your gap is a couple $100,000 out of the gate. That's per unit, right? And in New Mexico for the last decade, Alexandra, what's the gap? I mean, we do 25, 30, 40,000 a unit, right? I mean, we've never done gaps above that, right? So COVID and all of its crazy extremities, right? All of a sudden, it's not a $40,000 gap, it's a $200,000 gap. And what? And our policies have not caught up with that, and I'm not sure they will. I mean, there's a lot of folks in the field that are like, we can't come up with 200,000 a unit, that's not fair. Thus, communities are looking at increasing the incomes they can serve so they can do something. So it's a very convoluted model. And this is not to be disparaging, it's just to explain why it's so hard to get a project going. And then we have a lot of creative ideas, and I love these ideas. These are the hardest to do, doesn't mean you can't do them, but if you're not trying to do one of these models, you may be raising a couple 100,000, 300,000 units. So I think of our friends in Las Cruces. They're doing a really innovative, on city land, 50 unit special needs project, and they had to raise $15 million on their own, right? So they've been doing this a long time though. So again, lots of challenges. We will solve for some of this stuff, but we have to have something locally provided. So again, land is great. And we're going to talk about what other communities do. Money is great, money can be hard to do, but let's talk about what other communities are doing and where we might get resource. I think this is another one. Again, this is I want to talk a little bit about for sale. And I want to say this too, when I started talking to folks in Taos in 2020 and then came in 2021, the community engagement has been heavily focused on for sale housing because there's been nothing for a very, very long time, just being very blunt, right? You've had some rental projects here and there. There's a huge need for that too. But we were tasked at the very beginning to try to figure out the for sale part. So so how is this happening in other communities? So again, the state doesn't have some homeownership pool that they do an RFP on. They just don't have that. So communities often are getting, like I said, capital outlay or general funds, or they might get a congressional appropriation. So these are very niche-y, competitive funds, and they're acquiring land. And again, the county just did this. And was your source ARPA or was it general fund for your site? Do you know? Oh, it was ARPA. Okay. Again, and then, so what we also do to subsidize for sale is we often build market rate housing too, because we have to, right? So we often do a mixed income model, which is also better socially and so for many other reasons. But we oftentimes look at HomeWise in Santa Fe because they've been doing it the longest. And so we've been in conversation with them for months to try to figure out their model. But with the limited subsidy, even with land provided and infrastructure, you're still only seeing 20 to 30% of the units in a subdivision being, quote, affordable, right? Okay, well, let's talk about what would a local, so we talk about like, how would you do a local trust fund here? But I also think we need to be really clear, what would you use it for, right? And we're gonna kind of go back and forth in that tension of how do you raise the money and what would you do with it? But you've got some projects starting to pop, right? So again, the county has this beautiful site, and I probably spelled it wrong, the Cunningham property, right behind this building, this way, that way. It's gorgeous. I'm working hard on it for the last year under Brent's leadership. And they're interested in meeting some workforce housing needs. And then, you know, we've got other third parties popping up projects, right? The town's doing some stuff, THP's doing some stuff. There's let's see, how would I say, the sustainable developers always working on different things. So again, a housing trust fund could help a lot of these projects move forward. Am I talking too fast or just right? Great. I always do that. I want to get to the questions. All right. But I do want to talk about, so how are trust funds being funded? And again, I know that talking about the big towns isn't a great example, but I'm using them anyway because I'm thinking about it from a legal perspective. So Crucis and Albuquerque have been using general obligation bonds for a while. We were lucky enough to work with Crucis right before they got their general obligation bond for housing, the first one ever done a couple years ago. And what I loved about what they did, right, this is a question to the voters, it's a ballot initiative, is they had housing as one of many things they were gonna do. This is a trick that a lot of communities use, right? We don't wanna make housing this like a standalone because you might not get the votes, but if it's housing with trails and parks, especially in a lot of our communities. Jenny's laughing because it's right up her alley. But so that's, you know, I don't know if we could do that here or not, but that's a pretty common tool. Sometimes the sale of a government asset gets, that revenue gets committed. So you've got something, you can't use it, you sell it and you dedicate it to your trust fund. And then often redirecting fees that you're collecting. So Andy's talked about this a lot with some of your programs in the planning department. This shows up a lot if you have requirements for developers and more of an inclusionary zoning program, which is a very formal program where if somebody's coming in for entitlements, they have to provide a resource for housing. They're very complicated programs. I wouldn't start with that here. I think we'd all run screaming down the street, but maybe in the future there could be a way to do a fee. So very kind of simple ideas here. Big, huge caveat. I do a lot of work in Colorado, do a lot of work in New Mexico, and a lot of the stuff in Colorado doesn't work here, and I'm really clear about that. I'm going to show you a couple slides. I don't know if any of this would work here, but what I'd like to do is illustrate some creativity. Is that okay? Thank you. Okay. So, so lodger's tax is kind of a juicy one, right? So a couple years ago, my community, we got hired to research really creative ways to fund housing, and there's some wild stuff out there. There's like attraction taxes. But guess what? Most of the sources are taxes, right? I'm going to show you one that's not a tax, which is kind of fun. But most of the stuff we're looking at is either taxing more or moving a tax over, right? It's tax-based, which is going to require a lot of engagement and support to do. This is too many words, but what happened was we have limits to lodger's tax, and cities can charge more than counties. And in my community, most of my so I'm from La Plata County, Durango, most of the second homes who we want to hit with the lodger's tax is in the county, not the city. And so we did a bunch of calculations and went, oh, this is like, at this rate could be 2 to 3 million a year. What? Right? Oh, that's worth playing with. Well, we couldn't do it. We weren't allowed to do it because of the statutes. So in 2025, Colorado, through a bunch of advocacy through the county systems, and they said, we want to be able to jack up the lodger's tax to meet, to be able to do things because of what we're seeing. And again, I think there's a lot of at least relative issues to Taos County. But they adopted House Bill 1247, which allows counties to raise lodging, again, you got to go to the voters locally, but raise lodging taxes to 6% at the county level, aligning it with the municipalities. And so this is likely going to be a source in my community the next couple of years. This one is a non-tax source, and I love this story so much. And Jenny, I'm glad you're here for this one. So this started, again, we can do things locally, and we should, and we need to build track record, but real change is going to be at the state level. It just is. It's going to take state policy to change. In 2018, we have very active foundations in Colorado. They did, in 2018, there was just so much angst around affordable housing. A lobbyist came to Colorado Health and said, would you pay for this group to convene the realtors, the home builders, the advocates, and just see if there's anywhere we can all agree on a state policy, right? It was fascinating. I got to sit in the room. It was so cool. 2 days, they did a convening, they did some polling and convening again. And it was just as simple. What would you not support, right? Big list. What would you support? 3 things. Right? And one of the things was sort of like anything that's not a tax, right? Not helpful. But there was a really smart legislator in that room who said, I bet we can find a source at the state. They found this obscure vendor fee. So there's this fee, you can read this, it's like a fee that you get to keep because you have to pay sales taxes and it offsets the cost of collecting the fee. It's super obscure. Well, they found this fee and they said, well, what would happen if we increased the fee from 3 to 4% and then dedicated a portion to affordable housing? Well, nobody in that room had a problem with that. Now, folks that actually have the vendor fee were a little bit ticked, but they weren't organized and they didn't see it coming, so sorry, we got it done, right? And being a little blunt, it's helping them now, right? Because we're helping their workers find housing. But this generated like $40-50 million over a couple of years. So again, I think when you get people in the room across the aisles and you say, where can we agree? And you start to focus on the things that we do agree on, you can find some new solutions. I think we get stuck on the old ones and we fight and we never get past it. So this has led to so many other innovations in Colorado. It's been amazing, but we had to have that breakthrough. I'm not going to go over this one. This is another one. And we have another friend from Colorado. Cindy's from Colorado too. It's just another sort of tax that you can do, and it was on short-term rentals. So again, there's just a huge focus. You all know, you hear it, you live it on short-term rentals. Do you regulate them? Do you make them go away? Do you tax them? What do you do? Do you incentivize them to have locals like Andy's trying to do? But again, that's just another example, but I'm going to skip it because it's a little complicated. So in summary, I don't know what happened with my text here. When you start, we're at the beginning, local trust fund for Taos County. Be so exciting. We really want to focus on a few things. We got to be clear on what the money would be used for. We cannot be vague. It cannot be, $2 million a year, it would be lovely. We need to be $2 million a year. We think would generate 100 units here. Right, be very, very specific because it's likely going to take the voters unless it's a general fund thing, which I don't know that you have the funds for. But even if you did, you would still want to be really transparent about, as Alexandra said, the reason that trust fund has been so active for 25 years is that there's been, so much communication about the impact of it, right? And a little bit of organizing of the providers and the developers. And then, so you say, here's what we would do with the money, and maybe it's only 100 units, but we would meet 10% of the demand, right? So you set it within a context. And then after you have a track record of a few years, you could maybe get a little more creative. And I do think there's one county in New Mexico trying to figure out lodger's tax. They said that we can't talk about it yet because it's going through legal, and they don't want to jinx it, and they don't want it to be public. But we're tracking it, and if they break through, we will come back and let you know how they figured out if they could use lodger's tax or not. But Q&A, that was fast. So, yeah, Mark. Oh, let's get a mic. Everybody can hear. Nice.
Just following up on your closing comment, yeah. What are the complexity and the issues with the lodger's taxes that come to mind?
It's very political. So typically when you open up the idea of lodger's tax, well, one, you have to get state approval probably. So again, this county's trying to figure out if there's any loopholes. But if you don't need state approval, you'll probably have to do it as a ballot initiative. In my community, I can only talk to that experience. Lodger's tax is supposed to be used to promote your town. And we were able to make the argument, you've killed our town, promote it less, provide childcare and housing, right? And so now we can use it for childcare. So it's political, right? It's just a pot of money that typically you fight over. And but I do want to tell the story because I think it's interesting. We went from everybody fighting around the lodger's tax to the city has consolidated housing, tourism, economic development, and they call it the Department of Vitality or some crazy thing, but they've said you all got to work together because you're all, you know, and it was kind of interesting. So yeah, is that helpful, Mark?
Thank you. You mentioned that a lot of the changes that will be most helpful to us are at the state level. And I know we watch and we see things that pass, don't pass. And I was wondering if you could talk to a few of the things that would be most helpful in New Mexico at the state level, and then possibly even share specific samples, whether from Colorado or somewhere else, or things that have like shown up and died here that would be most helpful. You know, for our community, I'm thinking of like a second home tax, which I know has been tried and fails every time. But in Taos County, that would be super helpful. So if you could just address some of the specific policies, that would be great.
I would love to tag team because I bet you've got ideas. Yeah, I'm just going to talk about the ones top of mind because of the work we've been doing here. Is I would love, and I think one of the issues, let me back up. I am not an expert. I am barely a novice on the legislature here. It is, I have no words and I'm not going to pretend. But the last session, I think there was over 20 bills, right, Jenny? And what, like 4 passed? So the system is not set up to focus on outcomes. I'm just going to say that. It's not set up. You don't have paid legislators. There's a lot of stuff going on, right? And so there's drinking out of a fire hose, and it's not a great system. So maybe we should pay the legislators first. And then, but if we want to do for sale housing, I would love to see a pilot fund next year. And I don't know if it's a budget year. I don't think it is. But I would love to see a pilot fund of, I don't know, 30 million or something for home ownership that rolled out an RFP that was a competitive, transparent process, unlike some stuff happening now. And it's just crazy. And would be like 50, 60, it would be higher amounts of gap. That's like one policy that I think would help all of the state and especially northern New Mexico. So that's one. And I think it's focus, right? Pick one thing or 2 things. And the second thing I would say is new funds should really be administered by the experts. Every time we move money away from Housing New Mexico, it's really, really difficult. There's not that capacity at those other departments. It's not helpful for anyone. So.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that. I think at the state level, and what the state will do is make it really hard to use the money. Like they'll either create a very onerous application process or they'll have all these restrictions on it. And it's not coming from a bad place. It's coming from we have to protect this public resource and make sure that it's used for the highest possible benefit. So I would say like, let's put the emphasis on leverage and capacity. And one of the ways that at the city level, we built so much support for committing local funds to support housing was that we showed, and I talked a little bit about those leverage ratios. We said like, this isn't just $1. You're not providing $1 for this toward this cause. You're actually, if it's a tax credit project, it's 10 times that $1. Or if it's for down payment assistance, it's almost 20 times that $1. So I think that's something that the state doesn't have the expertise right now. And I know there was an effort to create the Office of Housing at the state level. They got to get it figured out with Housing New Mexico though, because that was like really confusing. Whose lane is what? They were fighting. That was sort of a mess. So I would say like before that happens, they need to figure out like, is one the money and one's the capacity building and the strategy? Like that might work. But I would say that there's a lot of work to be done there. But it is, to Jen's point, like, especially for smaller communities.
For Commissioner Brush, since you were involved in you were there when the millionaire tax happened, I mean, I think that's kind of similar, right? You tax at a certain level, you tax second homes. Do you know, would you like her to share a little bit about that experience? Okay, hold on.
So the city tried twice, and the first time was I wasn't working there, so it was like somewhere around 2008, 2009. And they called it a transfer tax, and it got killed at the ballot box. The realtors launched a huge marketing campaign against it, and the advocates for it, I think, made a mistake in that they created it as a moral issue. So they said, if you care about your community, you're going to support this. And if you don't support it, you don't have a heart. And so there were people who were like, no, you're not putting that on me. And so it failed at the voter level. So fast forward to, God, I'm losing track of time. Was it 2023 maybe? And again, the city's like, we're going to do this. We think that, things have changed. There's so much more awareness. We have a good track record with this funding. We're going to do this. And the very first thing, like the very first warning bell that went off in my head was when, it's going to apply to any home sales over $1 million. And the first question I asked was, what's that based on? Like, what's the nexus there? Why are we picking that number? What's the data? It's the right number. And I was like, oh no, we have lost. Like, I just knew it. And it went out to the voters. This time the voters were like, yes, this is a huge need and we're going to vote for it. The realtors came to the city and they said, well, okay, we know it's a need. We help people buy houses all the time. We understand that the challenges, but we also don't think it should only hit the residential side of the market. Why couldn't it also apply to commercial transactions? Because a lot of the big money commercial transactions are out-of-state corporations. Like, why wouldn't we want to tax somebody buying a shopping mall? But we feel, and they exaggerated the potential harm for sure, but we feel that it needs to be spread out among more taxpayers, essentially. And the city said, no, we got it. It's good. And guess what? They sued the city. And it is dying a slow death in a court battle.
So again, I think what we are looking for is and you don't do a lot of this stuff. And again, here we are. We need a track record. So we need our first 1 or 2 projects. And then once we show that we can do this, and they will be hard because we've got those gaps to close, then I think that's when you say, okay, we know what we're doing. We need your help. And that was a really excellent explanation of what happened, because if you're not in Santa Fe, it's like, what happened? Like, it's a no-brainer. Yeah, messaging is everything, right? Yeah. So, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah, yep.
Does anybody ever dare bring up property tax as a source?
No, banish the idea. It's really, really complicated because property taxes are raised for other things, schools, open space, trails. I think in speaking from the perspective of Santa Fe County, one idea, this is a creative idea. So New Mexico has a property tax cap so that if you are a continual owner of a property, your taxes can only go up 3% a year. This was based on this idea that there were land-rich, cash-poor families who were barely holding on to family properties, and if taxes went up according to market values, that they were losing, they were getting displaced, they were losing their homes. So, and this is one of those well-intentioned rules that has some unintended consequences. So as soon, as soon as you start restricting revenues, you have less money. And it's one of, I think it was Representative McQueen a couple years ago said, well, what if we remove that cap on homes that aren't primary residences. And that felt really good, right? Like, oh, the second home people who come to Santa Fe for the opera season and otherwise their bajillion-dollar house sits there empty for 10 months out of the year, yeah, their property tax shouldn't get capped every year. So that was a thought. But it also, another thought was a rental property. So somebody who's renting out a property would also not enjoy that property tax. Well, that got killed by the apartment association, of course. And I think part of it was that it just wasn't designed with enough nuance, because I think you could immediately have exceptions. You could say, if you're serving people with a lower income, if your property is located in a lower income census tract, if, whatever, like fill in the blanks, like you could build in some protections and create a little bit more nuance there. But I thought that was a great idea. It didn't go anywhere. I'm not sure if he's going to bring it back, but that's kind of the property tax angle. I could see that being palatable.
And Cindy, I can talk to Colorado. It's the opposite, right? So the 3% cap on property taxes, we have the 3% cap on state expenses. So we have $1 billion deficit in Colorado. So I'm probably going to move here. No, just kidding. Well, maybe, no. It's going to be bad. Yeah, thank you. It's going to be really rough the next couple of years. It has to do with a really archaic thing in our Constitution that we can't fix. It's like you have anti-donation, we have this thing called Tabor. This is why I always focus on state money. I'm not saying it's easy, but you have it. You have billions. You have billions, and it can't get spent. And we could have another session, maybe, Lisa, on capacity building and what it looks like in New Mexico. I don't know. Jenny knows this one quite well. But again, our issue is not money at the state level. It's focus, it's thoughtfulness about creating a structure that will work, that will address the challenges we know exist. We could have rural set-asides. We could provide capacity with the rural set-aside. It's at the state level. And so, Jenny knows it's time for a coalition. We need a real housing coalition in New Mexico that can take this on and help the legislators and build model policy so that we're aligned before the sessions. So, but that's why I always focus on the state.
I'm coming. Get your steps in.
I'm going to give a quick statutory background. New Mexico Statutes 345 is the municipal housing law, but much of what I'm about to read here, and it'll be very quick, applies as well to the county. Okay, thank you. Finding and declaration of necessity, and I'm just reading parts. Quote, there's a shortage of safe or sanitary dwelling accommodations available at rents, not for purchase. It doesn't say anything about purchase, at rents that persons of low and moderate income can afford, end quote. Goes on to say, quote, the shortage of safe and sanitary dwellings for persons of low and moderate income cannot be relieved through the operation of private enterprise, and that the construction of housing projects for persons of low and moderate income, as defined in the municipal housing law, would therefore not be competitive with private enterprise, end quote. Definition speaks about multi-jurisdictional housing authority, means two or more, so on and so forth, as in the town and the county joining together. And as for powers and for resources, the municipality can, quote, own, hold, and improve real or personal property, purchase, lease, obtain options upon, acquire by gift, grant, bequest, devise, or otherwise any real or personal property or any interests in real or personal property, end quote. So given that, why aren't we as a community using the powers of law to create our own housing? Why aren't we doing that as a government, as a community, town and county? We have the authority to do that. Why are we privatizing it? Why are we turning it into profit, so to speak? We should be doing this on and on and on as long as the need exists. So that's sort of a quick question, and I have a specific question. You referred to quote, new type of workforce rental housing project, end quote. Could you comment on that, please?
Sure. So in my experience, I lived here at Alexandra's, even well, I'm just going to say this. Most local governments are not well positioned to be direct developers. Why? They have staff turnover. They don't have the expertise of development in-house. Let me keep going. They don't compete well for the funds that they have to make the projects go. We do public-private partnership all the time. We just did a deal with Santa Fe County where they're the majority owner in a deal. So it's common for local governments to partner on, but not do it alone, right? What you read is a big basis of the whole test for the Affordable Housing Act. You're absolutely right. So we cannot subsidize anything the market can do. That's why the housing needs assessments are required, right? Housing needs assessment says, here's where the gaps are in your community, and this is where government should fund the gaps. So I'm going to stop you because we have limited time. I'm going to answer your other question, and I'm going to hand it on. I mean, this is like a 45-minute dialogue we could have about this, but that's a quick answer.
We can create staff, simply enough.
You can, but I will tell you, it is.
You've been at this for 4 years. We could have done it in 4 years as a community.
Please start. If you have the answers, I want them. Really, it takes a village. So, great. I will see you at the next meeting, and you can tell us what your project is. I would love that so much.
Cooperation with town and county in providing housing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It isn't simple, or we'd be there. Yeah. The second question I already forgot. What was it? Oh, it's the local community defines what that means. So what I have heard it mean is the rental housing here that folks can't afford. Let me say, people are over income for the federal programs. That's all it means. So the federal programs stop here. There's a gap here, right? And people would like to fill that gap as well. That's all it means. If you want to do those programs, you got to get more creative. The state has some new initiatives right now that go up to 150% AMI. So there's some modeling. I will never say the greatest need is always the lowest income. It always is the lowest income. But most communities can't afford just to do that. They just can't. They've got to be able to serve the spectrum, which is, or the continuum, which is why I like Alexandra's points about that in the Housing Trust Fund. I'm going to actually have to leave for an appointment in a few minutes, but do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think the place where that Municipal Housing Act could have some real legs is with municipal and county governments working very actively with their housing authorities. So the housing authority in Santa Fe, the Civic Housing Authority, the county has its own housing authority in-house, but the Civic Housing Authority became independent from city government 40 years ago. The current director is extremely entrepreneurial, and he took on a new HUD program called the Rental Assistance Demonstration Project. He recapitalized all of the public housing projects in Santa Fe, completely renovated them, made them beautiful, energy efficient, lovely to look at, just created dignity and a quality of life for the residents living there. And it was all using the financial tool, like thinking like a developer. And he did a few market rate phases of some of the projects, new construction, and market rate being that workforce housing. So those folks who can't qualify to live in the 80% below median income housing, but they don't earn enough to afford the market rent in the community. So he created some market rate, but lower market rate housing, because that's another thing we don't have anymore. We don't have naturally affordable housing in our market. We used to. When Jen and I started this work, there were developers who built moderately priced housing for no subsidy. It wasn't fancy. It was just what they liked and what they could build and the market they were serving. We don't have that anymore. All of the market pressure is to maximize value because there's so many risks. There's so many unknowns. And right now with tariffs and all that stuff, like who knows? So I think I think that there's a real opportunity there, to your point, to really empower and build the capacity of housing authorities, because they have some of that governmental resource and often they own property. And they're not thinking for the most part, they're not being entrepreneurial about it, and they're not sort of empowered to create housing and expand think about their housing as a portfolio and how to make it perform.
I think we have time for maybe one more question, if anyone has. Okay.
Well, first off, thank you both so much for coming to speak to the nuance of affordable housing trust funds and just financing affordable housing. It's been really interesting. I wanted to direct a question to Alexandra on a point you made earlier about the advisory committee for the grant process. And I was curious, how did you form that advisory committee? And did you do any capacity building for that committee as well?
That's a great question. So the committee was originally formed when Santa Fe first became an entitlement community for the Community Development Block Grant Program. And I think at the time, and this is what I don't entirely know, it may have even been a requirement from HUD. Well, actually, let me put it this way. I think HUD has some pretty detailed public participation requirements for the CDBG program. And I think the city's response, and this is way before my time, even though I feel like my time started a long time ago. But the city's response to that was, okay, we'll create a community-based advisory board to help advise us on how to make these funding decisions for the CDBG money. So when we got the trust fund in place, it was a natural fit to continue using this committee as an advisory board. The capacity went from kind of just like meeting and talking about, should we pay for those streetlights at the park in the low income census tract? Sure, why not? Kind of casual like that, to as we started to get more funds, we really did start to use that committee. They were our strategic planning board. They would decide at the beginning of the year, like I created a whole annual cycle, so they would decide, look at housing needs for that year. Do they want to change priorities? What kind of priority do they want to for the upcoming funding cycle? We would have this conversation over and over again. Do you want to really focus on one thing and throw a big boulder in the pond and create a really big splash? Or do you want to throw a handful of pebbles and all these little ripples go everywhere and everyone gets a little bit? And they would always say, we want to have an impact, we want to throw the boulder, and then they would always recommend funding the pebble style because, you know, these projects come before them and they're amazing and the providers are amazing and they're demonstrating the need, and it was always without fail, every single year we would sort of go through that exercise. And but I think to your point about capacity building, we didn't do a whole lot other than just staff providing information. We would sometimes have guest speakers come in and talk about different programs. What's the program? I think The Rock came in and talked to them about resident-owned communities, and so we would have some resources like that, but mostly, they were a pretty high capacity group of individuals, and so that was pretty exciting to kind of harness all of that energy and knowledge into the process. The terms were written into our code as 3-year terms. We had a couple of long timers, just folks who were great, and they kept saying, I'll step down, and I kept saying, no, not yet. Wait until I have more staff. Don't step down yet. Your advice is really helpful. But yeah, it's important to have turnover as well, because you start to have the same, which is why I left the city, to be honest. You just have the same mindset and the same practice because it works, and sometimes you miss the creative ideas.
This is not connected, but I just want to do one little wrap up. Sorry. That was a great question, by the way. I love where your head is. Yeah. I just want to say this. There was something that struck me in Alexandra's presentation and again, the program's over 20 years old, when you said there's no staffing and all that. This is just an important caveat to to the Santa Fe program. In the 90s, their enterprise community partners did a deep dive pilot program in 10 places in the country, and Santa Fe was one of them. And they developed the most sophisticated housing delivery system. It won awards. And the reason I say this is because we led the country, and we learned from that model. And so I want you to hear this too. A housing trust fund has to be coupled with contracts for services with nonprofits in the community, or nothing happens. So it's not enough to do this, and you can't fund the capacity in the community you need to implement. So they did it all, right? So they funded, and this was my big mistake, but it's maybe going to be okay now. And back to this gentleman's question, we had the county and the town fund Taos Housing Partnerships director for the first year. It was incredible. The idea is to have that go on forever, because again, what we have seen in Santa Fe is if we hadn't outsourced the program implementation, the second mortgages, all of the stuff that the implementation pieces, it would have all fallen apart after the second mayor. Like, this stuff just doesn't live well in government. It's too volatile. So that's the model here. And I know you talked about housing authorities. There's a different history of housing authorities up here, but point taken, like create the capacity outside the government so it outlives that administration, because it needs to. So anyway, hope that's helpful.
I'm just going to ask one last question to cheat. Sorry, I cut the line. This has all been super interesting and informative. And the town of Taos is not a home rule municipality. So I'm wondering what, if you're aware, what are some of the limitations that the town could face, for example, that the city of Santa Fe wouldn't face because it has access to less tools?
That's a really great question. I don't think I can answer it very well, other than to say when Santa Fe first set up a lot of this programming, it was not a home rule, so it can be done. I'm trying to think of like areas where, we had it so easy because we were home rule, and I think
the question pertains to the I'm going to call it the millionaire's tax, or the tax that went above. I think that was specific to a home rule community, and that's something we don't have in this community. So it's one of those, let's just level set that it's not necessarily a thing you can just do is change property tax.
Yeah, that's a great point. I was thinking trust fund. Yeah.
I'm going to do just a couple really quick wrap-ups, and then Alexandra's going to do the final wrap-up. Thank you both. Thank you. I just, every time I am around experts like you, I just continue to soak it up like a sponge. I have to say, and this is a funny part, Mark Goldman is a board member of Taos Housing Partnership, and he handed this lovely brochure off to me the other day, and he said, "Hey Lisa, would you just copy this one little paragraph and give it to Commissioner Vigil?" I'm like, "Sure." So I'm opening this thing up, and you just made reference to it. This is the Santa Fe Affordable Housing Roundtable. This was the winner of the 1996 Ford Foundation Innovations in American Government Award. And I read through this, and I have to tell you, I had so much fun because I went, Jenn Lopez, there's a photo. Daniel Werwath, Peter Werwath, we've seen Daniel. Peter is Daniel's father, who's in here. Alexandra's mentioned in here. Mike Lofton is in here from HomeWise, and I went, 30 years, guys. And what this is again, the testimony of how long it takes and how you get it started. So I'm giving this back to Mark. Thank you. This is circulating around, and it's absolutely beautiful. Two quick announcements. I think it was you. Tell me your name. Jim, did you bring up the book recommendation of Metro Coalescence? Just to let you know, we bought 2 copies this week. Andy's got one of them. Taos Housing Partnership is going to read a second one. And Alexandra's going to tell you we are officially starting a book club. So not with that book, but there's been enough interest, which is great. And I also want to recognize, again, my partners with Ancorum, all of you, Pamela and Lo and Jenny. Ancorum listened to what local and small communities were saying when we said we need more help. We're trying to figure this stuff. We're trying to learn as we go. And Ancorum went out with this really cool program called Homegrown Housing. And Taos Housing Partnership kind of put the word out to local communities and government entities and said, hey, here's an opportunity to be part of a learning cohort for a year. And I'm really proud to say we got our award letters today. Taos County has a team. Taos Housing Partnership, Andy will be joining us with Taos County, and we have a member, Laura, from Taos Behavioral Health, who often attends these groups. So there's 3 of us who will be representing Taos County, and I believe there's 10 communities that are in this. So we've got folks coming from Raton and Santa Fe and Gallup and Taos, and we will be a cohort of learners over the next 9, 10, 12 months. And I can't say enough I'm really proud of the fact that we had 3 applicant teams from Taos, and we're all coming together. And it's not about whose project is better and who's moving on what, but that we're all pushing this stuff together. So I want to say thank you to Ann Coram for listening and hearing that's what the need is. And what I hope comes out of this is that this larger regional rural community comes together and says, these are the policy places that we need to start digging in collectively together, because we have got to speak up on how our small towns are just not making the cut because all of the policy pieces fit the larger communities. So I'm really hopeful that that conversation is going to open up some of those avenues for policy where we go, can we please, as a state, figure out how we're really going to dig in on rural communities and get housing moving. So I'm saying that we will have more information on it, but thank you to Taos County and thank you to Taos Behavioral Health for kind of responding to that effort. And we have a really strong team coming from our place. So exciting.
All right, I get the last word. I just want to give another round of thanks to Jenn and Alexandra again. Thank you. Such a rich presentation.